Welcome to G Fun Facts Online. Napoleon's Grande Armée. In 1812, it was over 500,000 strong, the most powerful fighting force Europe had ever seen. Yet, on the vast, frozen plains of Russia, it effectively vanished. We've all heard the stories of the brutal Russian winter and the relentless Cossack raids. But what if the army's most lethal enemy was one it couldn't see, couldn't fight, and couldn't even comprehend? For 2 centuries, we thought we knew the answer. Typhus, we said. Case closed. But today, cutting-edge science is digging up the long-dead soldiers of that army, and they are finally telling their own story. It's a story that is rewriting history, and it's far more terrifying than we imagined. The key to unlocking this historical mystery is a field of science that sounds like something from a sci-fi movie. Archaeogenomics. Think of it as performing an autopsy on someone who died hundreds of years ago. Scientists can take incredibly small samples from historical remains, most often from the dental pulp preserved deep inside teeth. A tooth is like a perfect little time capsule. It can trap not just the DNA of the person, but also the fragmented genetic material of any bacteria or viruses that were circulating in their bloodstream at the time of their death. The process is meticulous. In ultra-clean labs, researchers extract these tiny, degraded fragments of ancient DNA. Using powerful sequencing technology, they piece these fragments back together like a complex puzzle and compare them against massive databases of known pathogens. This allows them to identify, with incredible precision, the exact microscopic killers responsible for the great plagues and epidemics of the past. And there was no greater test for this new science than the mystery of the Grande Armée. The story brings us to 2001 in Vilnius, the capital of Lithuania. During a construction project, workers uncovered a shocking sight: a series of mass graves, pits filled with the tangled skeletons of thousands of individuals. They were the remains of Napoleon's soldiers, those who had perished during the horrific retreat from Moscow in 1812. This grim discovery was a golden opportunity for science. For decades, history books and military scholars had confidently assigned blame for the catastrophic losses to epidemic typhus. Typhus is a brutal disease caused by the bacterium Rickettsia prowazekii and spread by body lice, a scenario that seemed to fit perfectly with the squalid, overcrowded conditions of a 19th century army on the march. So a team of researchers from the prestigious Institut Pasteur and other institutions went to work. They carefully extracted material from the teeth of 13 soldiers buried in the Vilnius grave, fully expecting to find the genetic signature of typhus. They ran their samples through the sequencers, and when the results came back, they were stunned. There was no authenticated DNA of the typhus bacterium. Nor did they find the agent of trench fever, another louse-borne disease. The prime suspect, the one everyone had blamed for 200 years, was missing from the scene of the crime. But they did find killers. In 4 of the soldiers, they identified the clear genetic signature of Salmonella and Borrelia C. This is the bacterium responsible for paratyphoid fever, a severe and potentially deadly gastrointestinal infection that causes high fever, abdominal pain, and crippling diarrhea or constipation. In 2 other soldiers, they found evidence of a different pathogen, Borrelia recurrentis. This is the agent of louse-borne relapsing fever. As its name suggests, it's a terrifying disease that attacks its victims with recurring, debilitating episodes of high fever, muscle pain, and weakness. This was the first direct genetic evidence of the specific diseases that were actually tearing through the Grande Armée during its darkest hour. The discovery of these specific pathogens allows us to reconstruct the horrific conditions with chilling new detail. It paints a picture of a perfect storm of disease. Let's start with the paratyphoid fever. This disease is typically spread through food and water contaminated with human waste. Now, consider the state of Napoleon's army. Their supply lines were a disaster. Soldiers were starving, eating whatever they could scavenge. We have first-hand accounts from French army doctors like a Dr. J.R.L. de Kirchhoff, who was stationed in Lithuania at the time. He documented widespread diarrhea and dysentery among the troops, and partly blamed it on soldiers desperately consuming salted beetroot and even brine from barrels left in abandoned houses. These contaminated, dubious food sources would have been the perfect delivery system for Salmonella. Then there's the louse-born relapsing fever. The soldiers of the Grande Armée wore the same wool uniforms for months on end. They rarely, if ever, had a chance to wash themselves or their clothes. They huddled together for warmth in crowded, filthy encampments. This created a paradise for body lice, the vectors of Borrelia recurrentis. The lice would have spread like wildfire through the ranks, carrying the disease with them. Now, imagine being a French soldier in the winter of 1812. You are already weakened by starvation and suffering from hypothermia. Your immune system is compromised. Then, you are hit with paratyphoid fever, leaving you with agonizing stomach pains and dysentery. At the same time, you are being ravaged by relapsing fever, which sends waves of incapacitating fever through your body. Neither disease was necessarily a death sentence on its own for a healthy person. But in a body already battered by war, cold, and malnutrition, this combination was catastrophic. The skeletal remains from the Vilnius mass grave confirmed this. They showed very little evidence of violent trauma from battle. These men were not primarily killed by Russian cannons or bayonets. They were consumed from within by a cocktail of diseases. But the Russian campaign, while the most dramatic example, was not an isolated incident. Disease was the constant silent partner in all of Napoleon's wars. Let's go back to his earlier Egyptian campaign in 1799. After his army brutally sacked the city of Jaffa, they were confronted with an even more terrifying foe, the bubonic plague. An outbreak swept through the French ranks, causing immense panic and casualties. You may have seen the famous propaganda painting, Bonaparte visiting the plague-stricken in Jaffa, which depicts Napoleon as a fearless hero, calmly touching the sores of his sick soldiers. The reality was a desperate attempt to control the narrative and prevent his army from collapsing in fear. In other campaigns, typhus, the disease mistakenly blamed for the Russian disaster, was indeed the main killer. During the Siege of Mainz in 1814, a typhus epidemic ravaged the besieged French garrison. Of 31,000 soldiers, only 12,000 survived, with the vast majority of deaths attributed to the jail fever of typhus. And then there were the more common, but equally deadly, scourges. Dysentery, often called the bloody flux, was rampant, spreading through contaminated water sources. In the first few weeks of the 1812 campaign alone, before the worst of the winter even set in, an estimated 80,000 soldiers were already suffering from it. Scurvy, the horrific disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was a constant problem on long campaigns where fresh food was a distant memory. The scientific data gives us the what, but to truly understand the horror, we need to hear from the men who lived it. The diaries and letters of Napoleonic soldiers provide a visceral, humanizing perspective. A German soldier named Jacob Walter, who served in the Grande Armée, chronicled the nightmare of the Russian retreat. He wrote not of glorious battles, but of the relentless, gnawing hunger, the biting cold, and the ever-present shadow of sickness. He described watching his comrades, men he had marched with for thousands of miles, simply sit down in the snow and die, too weak from illness and exhaustion to take another step. Their last moments were not in a blaze of glory, but in a lonely, feverish delirium. These personal accounts, when combined with the precise findings of archaeogenomics, transform our understanding. We move beyond mere statistics and begin to grasp the scale of the individual suffering caused by these invisible enemies. The archaeogenomic investigation of Napoleon's armies is a powerful reminder that history is not just shaped by great generals and decisive battles. The course of human events can be profoundly and catastrophically influenced by organisms invisible to the naked eye. The collapse of the Grande Armée in Russia was a critical turning point that led directly to Napoleon's eventual downfall. And it was as much a victory for pathogens like Salmonella and Borrelia as it was for the Russian army. The silent enemies that stalked the ranks of the Grande Armée were a decisive factor in the outcome of the Napoleonic Wars. The lessons learned from these horrific losses would, eventually, contribute to a greater understanding of hygiene, sanitation, and public health. Today, as archaeogenomicists continue to uncover the secrets of past epidemics, they provide us with invaluable insights into how diseases evolve and impact our world. And as we face our own challenges with new and re-emerging infectious diseases, the frozen graves of Napoleon's long-lost soldiers offer a sobering and timeless lesson about the enduring power of the microbial world. Thanks for listening to Fun Facts Online.